Welcome to Helping Hazelnut Clients Calculate Cost of Production, a webinar for TA providers. My name is Rich Schwartz with Alder Street Consulting, based in Portland, Oregon. So Alder Street Consulting provides business support services to agricultural producers, businesses, organizations, and government agencies at the intersection of food production, sustainability, and social justice. And I'm joined today by hazelnut growers Lori Stoll and Raina Wickstrom. Lori, do you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Lori Stoll. I am managing Skydance Farm with my husband Jerry. We are about a bit southwest of Portland in Sherwood or west of Sherwood, and we have 6 acres of Yam Hill um, hazelnuts that have been managed organically from the start.
Thanks, Lori. And Raina?
Hi, I'm Raina. I'm with Steenson Hazelnut Orchards in Salem, Oregon, and we have 10 acres of certified organic hazelnuts and about 60 acres of young trees that we'll be certifying soon in the future.
Great. Okay, so just to talk about the agenda for today's webinar, I'll start by talking about the project background that led to the webinar, and then I'll provide some details on a tool that was developed specifically for organic hazelnut growers in order to get a better understanding of their costs of production. However, this tool can be used to analyze production costs for any perennial crop, organic or conventionally grown. So during the webinar, I'll often refer to organic hazelnuts, but you can substitute other perennial crops as when I talk about hazelnuts. So I'll start with an overview of the tool and talk about some of the prerequisites to do before using the tool, and then walk you through how the tool is used. I'll then talk about some ways that you and your growers could use the tool to analyze their business and help them make business decisions. After that, I'll be leading our panelists in a conversation about their experience using the tool. And finally, we'll have time to address your questions. If you have questions during the presentation, you can click on the question mark icon in the GoToWebinar interface in the upper right and type in your question. And I will address questions in the Q&A session at the end. So the project was initially a collaboration between Oregon Tilth and the Oregon Organic Hazelnut Collective, OOHC. So they wrote a grant to Western SARE to fund the project. And the funders have requested that we gather data about the effectiveness of the project. And one of the ways we're doing that is by getting feedback from the webinar participants. So after the webinar, we're going to send everyone an email with a link to a brief survey. And when you complete the survey, we'll follow up with information about how you can download the costing tool. So the goal of the project was to improve the viability of organic hazelnut enterprises by helping producers better understand their production costs. And this was partially a response to a market study that had been done that had identified strong potential to grow Oregon's fledgling organic hazelnut sector. And while there are enterprise budgets available for conventional hazelnut production, there are no published budgets for organic production. So just to be clear, the goals for the project did not include determining a cost per pound to grow organic hazelnuts, nor establishing benchmarks for hazelnut production activities. We would love to have that information. But at this point, there just weren't enough data points in order for us to be able to generate that kind of information. Just briefly go over the project timeline. So it was a 3-year project, started in 2021. So Tanya Murray, who was a farm viability specialist at Oregon Tilth, kicked off the project with a cohort of 6 organic hazelnut growers. So some of you might know Tanya from her work developing the Know Your Cost to Grow program. In 2022, the cohort members ran some time trials and recorded data about their production practices. And later in the year, Tanya released the first version of the tool, which is used for recording and analyzing data. So while there are already existing tools available that could be used for calculating cost of production, Tanya wanted to build something that was tailored specifically to the needs of orchard growers. Then in 2023, in the wintertime, Tanya worked with the growers to help them understand the data that they had collected, doing cost calculations and analyzing the results. And she used the feedback from the growers also to refine the tool and also the recommended processes for data collection and analysis. And then in the fall of 2023, Tanya left Oregon Tilth, and I stepped in to bring the project to completion. I started by helping the 4 growers who stuck with the program in order to perform their cost calculations and data analysis. And then finally, this last year in 2024, I fine-tuned the costing tool and I wrote a user's guide. So what is this costing tool? So the tool allows growers to account for the variable costs that are directly related to perennial crop production. And the costs that we're tracking in particular are those related to labor, machinery, and inputs. So growers can combine the cost results that come out of the tool with business level costs and other costs in order to evaluate the net returns for the business. So other costs might include things like marketing costs and other general business costs. So in addition, the tool can be used to run some other kinds of analysis, things like making sure that the farm is generating enough profit to be able to replace machinery and infrastructure when it wears out. It can do some analysis around whether the orchard is covering establishment costs, and also for running a variety of what-if scenarios. And I'll talk about some of those a little bit later on. So the tool itself is implemented as a Google workbook or a spreadsheet. And in order to use it, you would go up to the website and either make a copy of the Google workbook and then continue to use it on the web, or it can be downloaded and used as an Excel spreadsheet. As I mentioned, the workbook is accompanied by a detailed user's guide. So the user's guide includes step-by-step instructions for using the tool, and it also has some suggestions for how you might be able to use the tool to perform various kinds of analyses. And let's see, the tool also has a few brief case studies, and in one of the appendices, it goes over some suggestions on how you can perform the time studies that we recommend for doing the analysis. And the user's guide is available up at the Oregon Tilth website as a PDF file. So in addition to the tool itself and the user's guide, we've also published a version of the tool that has some sample data included. And the sample data is there for instructional and inspirational purposes. And while it was gleaned from farms that participated in the pilot program, it's not intended to be used as an accurate reflection of any particular farm or a prediction of the costs that might be associated with a farm that you're working with. So again, it's really just there as a as a guide as you to help you using the tool. So next, I'm going to talk about some of the things that you'll want to do before you start using the tool itself. So the first thing you're going to want to do is gather data that's going to be used to determine the cost of production labor. And you'll start by making a list of all the activities that go into production, hazelnuts or whatever crop that you're analyzing. And in order to get a comprehensive list of those activities, we recommend that you just think about the steps that you follow in the order that they take place during a single production year. We're also going to ask you to think about each one of these labor activities in terms of the of what we're calling orchard units. And the 3 types of orchard units that we offer are by tree, by acre, or by event. So some of the activities that you do are going to be thought of on a per tree basis. So pruning, for example. Okay, so you'll want to come up with an activity rate for pruning a single tree. But for things like mowing or harvesting, it's easier to think about it in terms of on a per acre basis. And then in addition to that, we recommend that for activities that are regular activities but that don't scale with the size of the orchard or the density of the orchard, that you include activities that we call events. So things like setting up your mower, for example, or setting up a sprayer, or travel time to the orchard. So those are just discrete amounts of time that get spent, but they don't, doesn't matter if you have 1 acre or 100 acres. Those values are gonna remain the same. So ultimately, what we're trying to do is determine activity rates, which is how long it takes to complete a particular activity relative to an orchard unit. And there's a few different ways that you could go about um, gathering this data. So if you're working with experienced growers, they might have some sense of how long it takes them to do certain activities. So for example, your client might have an idea that it takes them about 4 hours to prune all 216 trees in their orchard. Or they might be able to estimate that it takes about 90 seconds to prune a single tree. And so that's a very reasonable place to start, is with that kind of personal experience to draw upon. For those who don't have personal experience and those who are working with hazelnuts, we do have some reference rates that we include as part of the tool. And this data was gathered from the participants in our pilot program, but the ranges are fairly wide. So we give you a target range, but it's going to be hard to be very accurate using that data. So if at all possible, we're going to strongly recommend that growers gather their own time trial data. And in a few minutes, I'll talk about what that process tends to look like. So again, the goal is to capture the full list of activities that make up the time spent in production over the course of the season. And the appendix for the user's guide includes a list of some of the sample activities. And if you look at these, you'll note that under any given category, we have a variety of different types of entries, and some of them are very generic. So it might just be mowing, might be an activity, but because of the variability within a particular orchard, it might make sense to list to list an activity more than once based on those characteristics. So under mowing, for example, it might be that your first mow in the spring takes a whole lot longer than subsequent mowing, or it might be that spring mowing in general takes a lot longer than summer mowing. And if that's the case, then having separate activities listed might make sense for you. But as I mentioned, we highly recommend that growers capture their own time data through running some time studies. And that's going to give them the best estimate of their actual labor costs. So time studies are a sampling technique that growers can use for generating activity rates for their own operations. And really, it's just a matter of measuring the total time it takes to do the activity and then the number of units that get affected. As I mentioned, and as you well know, the time to complete any task can be variable, whether that's by who's doing the work, whether weather conditions, could be time of year, it could be different parts of the orchard have different characteristics, and so we're going to encourage that you sample multiple times under the different conditions in order to be able to account for that variability. And it's just important to remember that the time data doesn't need to be perfect, right? And also that your clients are not going to need to track the time it takes for every tree or for every acre. The goal here is to just get a good ballpark estimate. And we have heard, and I think that there's an idea that gathering this kind of time trial data can be very burdensome. And we totally, we very much recognize that that it does take extra work in order to be able to gather this kind of data. And so we're going to encourage you to try a variety of different ways that might work for your clients and for their workers. So it is going to require some planning and some discipline on their part, but it really doesn't need to be a big burden. And later on, we'll be talking with our panelists about ways that they were able to capture the data on their farms. So the second type of production cost that the tool is going to track are those associated with machinery. And so here we're going to be looking at costs associated with the fuel and lube that's associated with running the machinery, as well as tracking repair and maintenance costs for the equipment. So, like with the labor activities, we're going to encourage that you generate a list of the machines that are used during the production process, and this can include very specific equipment for use in in growing that particular crop, or it could be just general tools or general machinery, things like the tractor or even the pickup truck if it's used to perform certain activities on the farm. And we're going to ask you also to gather data about the various machines. And in particular, for any of the machines that have a PTO, we're going to want to be able to list out what the PTO horsepower is. As far as the repairs and maintenance goes, the growers should be able to go to their records, whatever their record keeping system is, in order to be able to see what the costs were for prior years. Or if they don't have that information, perhaps they can look in their owner's manual to see what the maintenance schedule is and be able to do some estimates on repair and maintenance costs. So all the inputs that would go into the client's orchard are also considered part of their variable production costs. And so in a similar process, you'll begin by listing out all the inputs that the growers are using on the orchard. And that would include inputs relative to crop nutrition and soil fertility, as well as those that are used for preventing or controlling weeds or pests or diseases. Once again, you will want to gather the expenditure information. So, check the QuickBooks or sales receipts, wherever that information lives, in order to be able to get a sense of, how much money was spent on those inputs. And then the other thing that you'll need to think about when it comes to inputs is are the application rates, right? So you're interested in not just or not specifically, how much money got spent on inputs, but really how much of that actually got applied to the orchard, right? So for an example, if your client bought $5,000 worth of mulch, but only used half of it, then the actual usage is $2,500 worth. And then if they spread that mulch over 10 acres, then the application rate is $250 per acre, right? $2,500 divided by the 10 acres. Okay, so for the next little while, I'm going to walk you through using the tool itself. In other words, this is how growers will go about entering the data that they've captured into the spreadsheets that we've provided. And just some high-level tips. First off, you only want to enter the data into the white cells. The gray ones have formulas in them, and those shouldn't be changed. So we recommend that you don't edit the formulas. Hopefully at this point, they've all been beta tested and they're ready to go. So those should not need to be changed. And also that you don't insert rows or sort the data, because that might mess up some of the formulas that are there. The workbook itself is organized as a series of worksheets, and the first set of worksheets are used to organize the data that was collected, and then the final worksheet is used to perform the analysis itself. And this first worksheet here focuses on the labor activities. It's going to be used to ultimately determine the labor costs. So the grower will start by listing out all of the activities they do to produce their crop. And then also they're going to enter the information regarding the time it takes to perform those tasks. So they'll also need to indicate, as I mentioned, whether the activity applies to individual trees, whether they apply to acres, or whether they are individual events. And as you can see here in this sample, you would just fill out the data as it's shown. You would enter in the total minutes that got recorded, and then also the total number of units that it applied to. And then the tool does the math. It will determine what the activity rate is once that data is in place. You can notice that we're set up to handle up to 3 different time data samples. And again, for activities that are highly variable, we're going to encourage that you actually do 3 separate trials. So in this case, I've got the pruning set up with 3 separate trials giving 3 different rates, and then the tool will calculate an average rate. And then in the end, what we're trying to come up with is a base rate in minutes per orchard unit. In most cases, you'll just be able to use the average rate that got calculated, but there might be some compelling reasons why you might want to adjust those up or down. So the next worksheet is going to begin to gather to be able is blah, blah, blah. The next worksheet is used for collecting data about the machinery. And ultimately, what we want to try to come up with here is an operating cost per hour. And the operating cost per hour is going to include the fuel and lube costs, and as well as the repair and maintenance cost. So again, a similar process. You'll begin by listing out all the machinery that gets used. For those that have a PTO, list the PTO horsepower, and then we'll calculate the estimated fuel and lube cost per hour. And then once you add in the repair and maintenance costs, then and the number of hours that the tool got used over the course of the season, then we can go ahead and calculate what the repair and maintenance cost is per hour, and then ultimately the operating cost per hour by combining the two. Oops, I think I skipped. Yes, okay, skip the page here. So there is one more worksheet that you need to fill out relative to machinery, and that's to reflect the fact that for doing certain activities, there can be multiple machines that are involved, and each of those machines has its own operating costs. So, for example, a grower might have an 8-foot flail that they attach to their tractor in order to do the flail mowing. And each of those tools, the flail and the tractor, has its own operating cost. And so you're going to want to create an entry that combines the two and adds together the individual operating costs. So imagine here in this case that the tractor had a calculated operating cost of $21.50 per hour, and the flail operating cost came out at $18.50 an hour. So in combination, you'd get $40 an hour. So you want to fill out this worksheet with that information. Regarding inputs, the goal is going to be to capture all of the inputs that got added to the orchard and indicate whether you think about those on a per acre or a per tree basis. And then we're going to generate an input cost per unit regarding the units that you indicated. So imagine that the grower bought a bottle of seed crop for $72, and they used half of it on their 9-acre orchard, right? So half of it they used $36 worth, and then over 9 acres, it's going to be $4 per acre. And so again, here we're looking for what is the per acre, or in some cases per tree, cost for each of the inputs. Okay, so once the growers have entered all of their preliminary data, they'll be able to use this final worksheet to do their calculations, their cost calculations, and then that'll become the basis for doing further analysis. And while this might look complicated, there's a lot of numbers here. Most of it is information that's already been entered, and we're just going to use lookup tables to pull the data into this table. So up at the top, in this top section, there's a place where the grower is going to need to indicate an average cost of labor per hour, as well as enter the total trees and total acres that comprise the orchard. And the total cost of labor per hour is, the average cost of labor per hour is going to be used to generate the total labor cost. And in some cases, that's going to be an actual cash cost, but in other cases, that's not going to be an actual expenditure, right? Especially if a lot of the work in the orchard is being done by the owner themselves or by their family, right? Then they're not necessarily paying themselves cash out of the business, but we still want to be able to capture this as as part of the cost of production. So in order to come up with that value, there's a few different ways they might want to think about that. So if they do indeed have employees, then they can just use the fully loaded cost per hour for the employee, fully loaded meaning including tax and benefits in addition to the base wage. But if the work is unpaid, then perhaps they might want to use a value that is what the owner would like to be reimbursed for the work that they've done, or it could be kind of the opportunity cost, right? What might they be able to earn if they were to work off farm for the hours that they're currently putting into the farm? And then, oops. And then you'll just go ahead and fill out this table. The labor activity column, all of that information is going to be done as a lookup from the labor worksheet that was completed earlier. And there are little drop-down combo boxes that you can use to pull that information. And then similarly, for the machinery used for any activity, when filling this out, you can just select from the drop-down list which machine or machine combination applies to that activity, or none if there's no if there's no machinery used for the activity. So then we'll do a lookup and pull across the base rate. That rate can be adjusted up or down. And for a base analysis, you'll probably just want to use the rate that got calculated. But in order to run some what-if scenarios, this is the place where you would adjust those values. And then finally, we ask that you enter in the percentage of orchard units that the activity applies to, and then the number of times that that labor activity took place during the growing season. So pruning might not happen on every tree, right? So maybe you might be pruning every second year, they might be pruning every third year, right? So pruning might not apply to the entire orchard. And similarly, something like a mowing might happen, 6-8 times over the course of the season. So once all of the data is in place, then the tool is going to calculate the total labor hours for the activity, and then calculate a labor cost, multiplying the labor hours times the cost of labor per hour. And similarly, for the machinery cost, it will use the operating cost for the machine times the number of hours that the machine was in use. So each row will have its own labor and machinery cost, and then down at the bottom of the table, we'll have totals for a labor cost and for machinery cost. Oops. Okay, and as far as inputs go, there's a separate section in this worksheet for entering the information around inputs. It's a very similar process. List out all the inputs by picking them from the drop-down lists, adjust the cost to use or just use the calculated one, and then indicate the percentage of orchard units that it was applied to and whether it was applied one time or more than one time. We will then go ahead, the tool will calculate the input cost for each of the inputs and total up the value down at the bottom of the table. And then, so once all of that data has been entered, in the results section down at the bottom of the worksheet, we're going to go ahead and summarize what the variable costs of production were for labor, for machinery, and for inputs, and then that will generate the total variable cost for the year under analysis. And in addition to having those numbers available, we also generate this pie chart, and that gives you a nice visual to see the relative percentage of costs coming from each of those three areas, each of those costing areas. So as a next step, we ask that the growers enter in information so we can calculate total revenues, and that would be putting in a price per pound, and then also putting in the total crop yield. The total revenues then is just the product of those two. And then finally, we come up with a value that's the returns over the total variable costs, which is going to be the total revenues minus the calculated total variable cost value. So note that the total calculated by the tool, again, is not necessarily a cash flow value, right? And this is going to be especially true if the labor was unpaid because the growers and their family were doing most of the work. And then also note that the tool is not accounting for all costs. We're really just focused on the variable costs of production. So in order to do a more robust analysis, a full analysis will want to include some of those other costs. And the user's guide has information about what those other costs might be and how you might be able to build a table like this one shown here. So the tool will only take it as far as I showed on the previous screen, and these further analysis tables are ones that that the user can build, that the grower or you with your help can build, and we've got some suggested ways to build these tables. So if you use the tool as I've described, then a grower can get a good understanding of their current cost structure and what the returns are for the current state of the orchard. And if the orchard's at full maturity, then it's likely that that these numbers are going to stay fairly constant moving into the future. But if the orchard is not yet fully mature, then it might make sense to do a multi-year analysis. So, costs and returns are going to vary as the orchard matures. And in particular, right, the expectation is that the total pounds, the yield, is going to increase as as the trees mature. And so you're able to use the tool to do this kind of multi-year analysis. It's essentially you start with a single year analysis, and then you just repeat that process, projecting out into the future, considering which factors are likely to change. So, might the labor activities be different in the future? Might you change the machines that get used? Will the activity rates change, right? Will it take longer or more or less time to prune the orchard as the orchard matures? Some of those considerations. And then so you'll gather that information on a year by year basis, and then you can summarize the results in a table similar to this. So there are a variety of other ways that the tool can be used to perform analysis once you have your total variable cost of production. You can then use that information to answer other kinds of questions. So one of the questions that might be of interest is, will a mature orchard over the course of its life be able to will be able to cover the costs, the establishment costs that went into bringing the orchard to maturity, right? So, for an orchard crop, it takes several years for the trees to be able to bear fruit or bear nuts, and yet you're accumulating costs. And so it means that the historical net returns prior to the year under analysis is likely to be negative. You can think of these as the establishment costs, and then the user's guide goes through a process for determining does the orchard over its lifetime, is it able to recover the costs of establishing the orchard? Another analysis that you can do is making sure that the orchard is capable of generating enough revenue that's going to be able to cover replacement costs, right? So if you think about the depreciation of the machinery and the fact that the machinery ultimately might need to be replaced, you want to be able to, right, in order to have a sustainable orchard, you need to be able to be generating enough revenues to be able to replace the machines as they wear out. And so we provide a process that you can follow using the tool in order to be able to do this kind of analysis. So doing what if scenarios can be fairly straightforward for certain types of questions, right? If you have questions about what happens if labor gets more expensive, what happens as my yield increases, what happens if the price goes up or down, right? So doing that kind of analysis is fairly straightforward. Plugging in some, making small changes into the tool, you can see what that effect has on both the total variable costs as well as the returns. You can also use it to support some more complex analysis. And one that we particularly had in mind when we built the tool was the transition to organic question. And so in order to do that kind of analysis, you would start by, if you're working with a conventional if you're working with a conventional grower, you can do the analysis on their conventional orchard, and then you can project what the changes that would need to be in effect in order to grow organically. Of course, in that case, you would need to be doing a fair amount of guesswork regarding activity rates for the activities that would change going from conventional to organic. If you're analyzing hazelnuts, then you can use the reference rates that we provide as a starting point. And if you're doing other crops, then hopefully you'll be able to pull that information from the web. Let's see what else. Okay, so other kinds of what if scenarios. This is an example that I worked on with Lori. So Lori was not at a point where she had revenue data. She had her costing information, but not revenue data. And we were interested in the question of the combination of price and yield for the future that would be able to cover those production costs that we calculated. And so by mapping it out in this table, I was able to give her a sense of under what scenarios the orchard would be profitable to the point where it was covering her labor costs. Okay, so that was a lot of me talking, and so let's go ahead and move on to our panel discussion. So thanks for sticking with me, Lori and Raina. So the way this is going to work, I've got a handful of questions I'll be asking the panelists, and then as well, if you have questions, please go ahead and you can either enter them into the GoToWebinar interface under the question area. Look for the little question mark up in the upper right, or else later on when we get to the Q&A session, you'll be able to just raise your hand using the reaction button down in the bottom left. So to start with, Raina, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit more about your farm, size, age, you talked a little bit about location, but in particular, any growing practices that might be unique to your farm that you'd like folks to know about.
Okay. So we have 113 acres total on our property, and about 75 of that is hazelnuts. We have Webster, McDonald, Polio as our main cultivars in all of 3 orchards. We dry land farm, and we also have less trees per acre because we are doing 20-foot working rows with a hexagonal planting. For fun, makes things a little bit trickier, but yes, it helps with airflow and to get more sun down onto the cover crops. We focus a lot on sustainability and renewable energy, and we're a small family crew. There's only usually about 4 or less of us working during the day, but we have 4 generations living on our farm.
Cool. Okay, and Lori, you want to tell us a little bit more about your farm?
Yeah, we have a total of 19 acres. It was part of the farm that my husband's family was tending. They had mostly hazelnuts, but in an older variety. And the property that we have had been sour cherries, but they were removed before we started farming it. So right now we have 6 acres of hazelnuts. Most of that's in one orchard, but there's a small bit in a slightly separate area. And they are Yamhill. Then we also have some about 4 acres of timber and 4 acres of old forest with a creek down the middle. Our hazelnut orchard has a portion of it that has a 30% slope. So that's always in our minds when we're looking at how to tend it and manage it and deal with it. It is all this, the labor is supplied by my husband and myself. So two of us. We are dry land as well. We've managed it since the start organically. We will be applying this year to get organic certification. And let's see what else. Yeah, I'll stop there unless you have any questions.
Okay, I think that gives us a good overview of your production. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the time trials. So Lori, starting with you, can you talk a little bit about what that process was like for you and how you went about gathering your data and recording it?
So we started off with just since it's just the two of us, it felt a little easier to try and manage our data collection than if we had employees or contract labor happening here and there. We also wanted to try and capture everything we were doing. So we didn't really start off trying to get a sample. I mean, we just started off trying to collect to log all the data, all the labor that we did every day and note what it was. And so we were kind of noting it on a whiteboard, and then I would put that into a spreadsheet. As we've refined that now, this being what, the third year, we have created a spreadsheet that you can't see there. So it has all the tasks down one side, and there's a page per month and every day of the month. And then we can just log for each day what we did as far as how many hours per task. So it's on a piece of paper. We each have our own month calendar, and then I can take that later on and do what I want to do with it. Because our orchard is sort of small, so you don't have smoothing of data with a large area that's similar. That orchard's just different all over it for a variety of reasons. And it was just, we felt better trying to just log everything and look at the amount of hours per task for the year rather than having a sample. And there's a couple things that lend them to doing a sample, but for the most part, that's not how we start. And I guess the tip I would say is when we all started, we were all asking a lot of questions to be like, well, how do we perfectly get the data for what you want to do, Tanya? And I think, at least for us, it was in the end, well, it doesn't have to be perfect, and you just need to start. And in the end, when you're looking at the analysis and the way that Rich just talked about, what you might not have been as accurate about or what might not be included in there, but it gives you what you need in general. So don't spend a lot of time worrying about how to perfectly collect that data. Just start something.
Nice tip. And Raina, how about you? What was your experience with the time trial and gathering data and recording it?
Yeah, I really enjoy doing it, collecting the data and then seeing the patterns or watching the time improvement as we figured out how to do the jobs and working together to try to, be as efficient as possible in the orchard. So I was in charge of making sure that everyone kept track of time. And we had not previously been doing that. So it was like a reminder every day when they go into the orchard or come back. So I would send a text message out, like starting pruning. And then hopefully at the end, we'd remember to send another text message saying stop pruning. But with that one point in time, it was easier to figure out how long we were in the orchard for. But yeah, as the time went on, it was easier to know, how long we were out there, what we were doing, and just um, the general picture of it. So yeah, using averages but yes, that text messages for communication and also as a record from being out there.
Great, thanks. Okay, so maybe Raina, if you want to talk a little bit about what you learned from the process of using the tool, either again the process of gathering data, what insights that give you, and then doing the analysis once the information was in the tool itself.
Okay. Well, our farm log, unlike Lori's, was just a book that we wrote in to keep track of the major activities that we were doing. So with these time trials, it was nice to have all the different activities just written out in a line so we can see which activities were coming up and what we needed to do to help keep track of those. And then throughout the year as that went on. One of the things that was interesting was learning about how much it costs to run equipment. I think our big tractor was a little over $20 an hour, which is crazy to think about, but it makes sense. And that was one of the many reasons we switched to an electric tractor. Not totally switched because it's not powerful enough to do a lot of our jobs, but most of our time spent in the orchard can have the lower powered electric tractor, which comes out to about $5 or less an hour. And then it also helped us see the patterns in the labor and the machinery costs and inputs. And so as the trees were younger, all of like the labor went down, the machinery costs, well, I can't say if those went down or up because you can use the machinery a little bit more on the older trees. And the inputs also decreased. So we were able to kind of track that, which was nice. And then the multi-year analysis was really interesting to see and project out a few years to when we're actually hopefully making money as our trees get older and produce more and there's less labor going in there. Yeah, overall, the worksheets were really awesome. The work that Tanya and Rich put into them is really great.
Good, thanks. And Lori, how about you?
So what I had not mentioned initially, I think, was that our trees are like 6 and 7 years old. So over the course of this project, they've been different every year as they grow and what's needed, and as we learn what we want to be doing with them and change some of our thinking. So every year is a different year yet. It's not settled into, like Rich mentioned, well, once you've done this with a mature orchard, you kind of are set. But as the trees are growing, it was different every year, and our thinking keeps evolving as well. So our first piece of information, I think, when we first had done this and had the time in, was really a recognition of which tasks take a lot of our time and which tasks don't take very much time. That was really useful and continues to be useful and help some of our thinking and planning. So, for instance, the first year we identified how long things took. Okay, these things took a lot of time because the next year we wanted to be doing more work to get ready for being able to harvest. And we needed to find some time. So we needed to recognize, well, then these couple tasks that really took a lot of time, maybe we can make some changes or let some things go so that we have more time this year to be working on getting ready for harvesting. And I think we'll keep doing that because for us, time is a real limiting factor with just the two of us. And so it keeps being a balance, and this tool helps to look at that. Then working through, Rich outlined some of what we had done last year, looking at the matrix and playing around with different things to look at costs. And so it was certainly helpful to see there was a way to eventually come up with not losing money and actually paying something to ourselves. So that was good. And I guess now and going into the future, the challenge will be how to make more of those parts of the table look like they could earn something. um, so those are both ways to be playing around with it, looking at time and how to manage time so that we can do what we need to do more of, and then trying to manage things so that it looks better on the cost side.
Great. And in terms of the support that you received from Tanya or from me, would you, do you feel like this is something that you would have been able to do yourself or interested in doing yourself? Or to what degree how important is the role of the service provider in, giving you that kind of support to do this analysis? Laurie,
Is
do you
that
want
for
to?
me or me?
Sure, Laurie, why don't you start?
Well, for me, it's really helpful because time is such a constraint for us. It's very hard for us to get to this kind of thing. We just really don't have time to do all the things we're trying to do in our lives. And so having a provider help, first of all, set up a time like we're going to do this. And so that prioritizes some of what we need to do to make it happen, and be ready for it. And then it assists a lot with causing it to really happen and be able to discuss it with the provider. So to us, I think it's really helpful.
Okay, Raina?
I agree with what Laurie said, especially with carving out time and having things done like ahead of time before meeting with you guys. But also, yeah, just the little pieces of it, um, where it's just like kind of a question of should this go in there or this go in there, being able to ask and have a professional um, being able to let us know what to do. So that was really helpful. And the all of the extra things in there, like figuring out machinery costs or like the general information for um, like the multi-year analysis or how um, much to expect the crop to be as the years go on. So that kind of information in there is very helpful.
Also, the provider's been working with, at least for you guys, working with other orchards and farmers. So you have some insight you can help us with as well, kind of cue us with. So that's helpful also.
Great. And so maybe as a final question, do you have any recommendations for farmers who are using the tool, just based on the experience that you had? Anything come to mind?
I would say it might seem discouraging at first, especially if you have young trees, but to still keep going through and doing it with the time trials and stuff, and then do the multi-year analysis so you can see that, it not all is lost. And you can be successful with hazelnuts. You just have to give them a little bit of time to grow and a little bit of labor, and you can have a strong and healthy orchard.
Yeah, I think the not be discouraged part is a good tip. It seemed kind of um, like a bit of a black hole at first when we're trying to figure out how to get the data and how to perfectly get all the numbers we're supposed to get. Um, but like I said at the start, don't worry too much about it being perfect. Just start in the best way you can collect data, and then it really is interesting. So I guess the tip is don't worry too much about getting it perfect at first, and certainly it really does help a lot to have a provider to work with you, so you're not just on your own to make the time and figure it out.
Great. Okay, so I think I'd like to open it up. We've got about 5 minutes left. If anybody who's attending has a question, feel free to raise your hand or enter it into the question area. And maybe while people think, I just again want to remind folks that we will be sending you a survey regarding today's webinar, and we would very much appreciate it if you just took a few minutes to fill that out and send that back to us. it's one of the requirements from our funders that we gather this information, and we would, yeah, we'd love to be able to have that data to share with the funders. So not seeing any questions. Maybe just one more then to throw out. Yeah, so do you feel like based on the data, having gone through this process and the data that you collected, maybe talk about, I guess each of you mentioned some of the small changes that you made to your practices based on having that data available to you. And I'm wondering if you imagine future changes that might, that might continue, and business decisions that you might have made or might be making based on the data that you had you've gotten from using the tool.
Well, I'll jump in right there because so part of this was also we were sharing amongst the group of growers who started this project. And so even just now and hearing Raina, it's like, oh yeah, we haven't spent a lot of time looking at the differences of one piece of machinery over another piece of machinery, and we could do that. So to look at cost benefits. So there's something for us right there.
Yeah. One of the things that we are always considering is selling direct rather than just selling to the processor, which we've historically done with our older orchard in the past. But selling direct has a lot more work, but the return can be hopefully a lot better. So that's one of the things to help offset our costs.
And so that's an analysis that you can use the tool to do some projections and see how that impacts your numbers. Is that what you're?
Yeah, I mean, it could, yeah, with the cost that you get from selling the hazelnuts, but of course you have to add in a lot more marketing costs and stuff with that. But
right, yeah, so it goes not just
evens out.
Right, so it's not just your production cost, but of course you've got to cost the sales at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Well, if there's no further questions, then maybe we can go ahead and end this here. I want to thank everybody for attending. I especially want to thank our panelists, Laurie and Raina. And we will be sending you, once you've completed the survey that we send you, we will send you a link to to where you can download the user's guide and the tool from the Oregon Tilth website. And that is also available now, so you should be able to search and find that link. But if you fill out your survey, then we will go ahead and email a direct link to that. So thanks everybody, and have a good afternoon.